Welcome, everyone. My name is Renee Forsyth. I'm the Director of Professional Development for Lyme Connect, and we're thrilled to have you join us for this in our series of Voices of Lyme sessions, where today we will focus on the insights of people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And before we kick off into the presentation, there's just a few details I would like to share. We do have live captions available, and you just need to activate those through your own personal toolbar. We also have an ASL interpreting team joining us, and they are spotlit on your screen. So hopefully you are able to see them. Please let us know if you're having any trouble with that. We also would hope to leave time for questions, so you can please share your questions or thoughts either in the chat or in the Q&A feature, which is also found in your toolbar. And I would like to first share a visual description of myself. I am a white female with dark brown shoulder length hair, and I am in front of a lime green logo background. And I'd like to start this session with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that our session today is coming in part from Manhattan, which we recognize as the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Lenni Lenape and Wappinger people. By now acknowledging legacies of displacement, migration, and settlement, we are taking a small first step toward the process of healing and repair. So before I turn the session over to our moderator and panelists, I want to take just a moment to share a little bit more about Lyme Connect for those of you who may be joining and unfamiliar with us. We are a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. We do that by attracting, preparing, and connecting high-potential professionals and university students, including veterans, who have all different types of disabilities into our network. Once an individual joins our network, they are eligible to apply for different scholarships, leadership programs, internships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations, including our corporate partners. Many of you joining today, I know, are joining us from our corporate partners. In turn, we also support our corporate partners in recruiting, onboarding, developing, retaining, and promoting all employees who have disabilities. So if you are not already a member of one of our Lyme Connect communities, we encourage you to join them. If you are a person with a disability, we encourage you to join the Lyme Network. There is no fee to do so. If you are joining us from a corporate partner, there is a corporate partner community. We also have a university partner community and Friends of Lyme. So I know my colleague is sharing information about how you can join one of those communities in the chat, and we will also be following up with everyone who registered. This session is being recorded. It will be posted in our Lyme community platform in just a few days, so you can revisit all of the great insights that we're going to talk about today. So before I would love to introduce our moderator. We have a great moderator in Vanessa Kelly. Vanessa is a deaf disability advocate, speaker, and writer who practices narrative advocacy in the belief that sharing our stories is a change catalyst. Vanessa is a practicing corporate lawyer at Goldman Sachs and a member of the leadership team for the Disability Network, where she creates educational programming and training, participates in disability recruiting initiatives, and implements disability inclusive policies and procedures. We also have been lucky enough to have Vanessa as a mentor in Lyme Connect's foundation program for young professionals with disabilities. Vanessa is a regular panelist and speaker at corporate and nonprofit disability-related events, including the Hearing Loss Association of America, Creative Mornings, and as faculty for the Practicing Law Institute. Vanessa has been featured on NPR and other media publications and the marketing campaigns for the Center for Hearing and Communication and NYU's Cochlear Implant Center. We are so lucky to have Vanessa with us here today to moderate this session, and I'm excited to invite Vanessa to the webinar and help us meet these amazing panelists. So thank you for joining us, Vanessa, and thank you to all of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Renee. I really appreciate such a lovely warm welcome. And it's an honor to be here today supporting Lyme Connect. And welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And welcome to those of you who watch this video later. We're so happy to have all of you here. As you know, my name is Vanessa. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with blue eyes, long curly red hair. I'm wearing a black blouse and I'm against a blue background. I have been deaf since birth and currently use a cochlear implant, a hearing aid, and lip reading to hear. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, where I share my home with my partner of 16 years and a very adorable dog. Now, we have an amazing group of panelists today, and I'm so excited for you to be able to meet them. So, panelists, I'll invite you, I'll just call on you so that we have order here. And if you could share your name, your visual description, and a bit about yourself, but most importantly, how you identify your particular hearing disability. As we know, we create space. Everyone inhabits their disability in a way that feels authentic and personal for them. For some, that means using the term disability. For others, it means eschewing that term. And so it's important for all of us to be able to inhabit our identities in the way that it feels authentic to us. And then also share just your position, your company, and where you're participating from. So, Laura, let's start with you.
It would be great if I put myself off mute. So thank you, Vanessa. Hi, everyone. My name's Laura Friedman. I'm a white woman with long, straight red hair. And I come from Citigroup, where I lead strategic enablement and engagement for the business office supporting our CIO. And outside of Citi, I am also a hearing loss advocate. I wear 2 hearing aids and have had hearing loss since the age of 3, if not since birth, but we're not quite sure. And while I identify as someone who has a disability, I am not disabled by it, and think the term disabled needs to be reconsidered. But I am proud to have a disability, and I think it changed my perspective on the world that we live in. Did I cover everything that you asked?
Wonderful, wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome. Thank you again for joining us. Nancy.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Nancy. Last name is Gadudo. And I'm a Caucasian woman. I'm capital D, deaf, as I like to say. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have brown hair. I'm wearing silver earrings, and I have a black blouse and a blazer on. I am from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I work at TD Bank. I am an officer 3 for TD Bank. I've celebrated now 25 years with the bank. I basically fund mortgages. I process payments. I'm in one of the payment processing mortgage centers that are scattered across Canada. I'm currently in the office. We actually have 2 interpreters working with us today that you visually are seeing. And then we have my TD staff interpreter working with me as well as my voice. And I'm really glad to be here and networking with all of you.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome. Thank you again for your time. And Christopher.
Yeah, hey, I'm Christopher. I'm a white male with strawberry blonde hair. I'm wearing headphones, green polo. My background is up San Francisco. It's a place I enjoy going to visit every now and then. Product manager working for Microsoft on Xbox in the gaming space. A little bit about my disability. I'm deaf. I sort of I'm kind of hybrid in between both worlds. Like I use American Sign Language and I consider myself a part of the deaf culture. I'm very involved in the community. And I also I grew up though completely verbal in an oral family, and so that was sort of my upbringing until I got immersed later in life into the deaf community. And so I'm kind of sort of like in between both worlds there in a sense. So that's a little bit about me. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to meet all of you. And I would love if you could share for our audience how you experience your particular deaf, hard of hearing identity in the workplace, including how did you approach the issue of disclosure? And Nancy, why don't we start with you?
Definitely, I don't mind sharing this at all. I think it's really hard for me to say like I can hide my deafness. There's no way for me to hide it unless, when people approach me, they don't know that I'm deaf right away. But as soon as they approach me, I then automatically have to self-identify by saying, "Oh, I can't understand you. I'm a deaf individual." So at that point in time, I always ask an individual to either like grab a piece of pen and paper so we can actually communicate. But with technology, we can use, voice to text options as well, which always helps. As far as in the workplace, if a colleague of mine or anything like that, someone from a different department reaches out, sometimes we use, MS Teams or something of that sort, and they ask to chat with me. Again, I always reply to let them, know I want to help them as much as I possibly can. Or if a colleague says, "Oh, it's really important, I need to speak to you. Can you pick up the phone and let's give each other a call?" I then just let them know that I'm deaf, and maybe we could still use our chatting through Teams to communicate whatever information we need to share between each other. And it's usually never really a big issue. It always just seems very seamless. I'm very lucky like that. I've never had a really challenging time with anybody that I've actually disclosed my deafness to. I've never really struggled with that.
Thank you. That's really wonderful to hear that you've really had an experience of ease and openness in your employment at TD, and that you feel comfortable being able to share, your colleagues support that. But you're also supported by TD in a way where you have the accessibility that you need. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we use for accessibility, but thank you. Christopher, would you like to share how you've experienced your identity in the workplace? I imagine Microsoft is known for being a leader in the forefront of accessible technology, and your chief accessibility officer is phenomenally famous for being just at the forefront of accessibility practices in the workplace as a best place standard. So I'm curious what your experience has been and how you approach the issue of disclosure.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was kind of growing up and into college, I didn't disclose or talk about my disability as much. It was something that, I sort of put in a box and tried to navigate life, as anyone else. That was sort of like what I thought I was supposed to do. And then when I got to college and sort of into grad school, I started to realize that wasn't the right approach. And I started learning. And I started learning a lot during internships, some of the challenges that I experienced of not disclosing at different companies, and, just having to like self-advocate, but also sort of pretend like my disability didn't exist. And I just realized that wasn't the right approach. And when I got to Microsoft, and there was like mentors that I talked to kind of digest, disclosure. But then I got to Microsoft, and Microsoft is, as everybody knows, is a very high priority focus on accessibility, disability inclusion in that space. And so I was very like empowered by sort of like seeing other people talk about how they talk about their disability and just the frameworks and approaches that people take. And so I, started being more open about it. And so I'm about 5 years into my career at Microsoft, and like it's been very interesting to see sort of like the growth I've had of like how I approach my disability over that course of time. And I give a lot of credit to the people that I'm surrounded with. So very fortunate to be at this company where I've been able to kind of build that, skill or sort of like self-advocacy.
Thank you, Christopher. I so appreciate you sharing that this is a journey, and that you sometimes start at a place where we don't disclose, or we don't have a level of comfort or even an ability to be able to advocate for ourselves, but then through the right mentors, maybe through therapeutic support, but most importantly, through really supportive employers, that skill can develop and transform, and it can really have powerful impacts on us personally and professionally. And Laura, I would love to hear your experience as how you've inhabited your disability at City and prior to City, but also how you've approached the issue of disclosure.
Yeah, so similar to Christopher, I didn't always disclose, and I actually didn't disclose at City mainly because I forgot. But I want to touch on, early in my career and getting my first job was really a challenge. Because I live fully in the hearing loss world, I'm fully oral. I actually don't know very much ASL. I'm seen by my peers think in a great way and a not so great way as being typical. And so I'm able to really fake it until I make it, until it shows. And because of that, I think some employers early on in my career had a hard time knowing what I wouldn't be able to do or how to best accommodate me, since it was hard. And so it made me kind of like a turtle, like go into my shell a little bit and be afraid to disclose. I also sought out smaller companies. I went to a smaller college. I always thought I liked being a bigger fish in a small sea, not a small fish in a big sea. And looking back, realizing that they don't really have the resources or the know-how or the to really know how to help me, and I had to educate them. But I also didn't know what I needed in the workplace. It's very different than being in school. So that's a learning. So then when I went to City, also about 5 years ago, my world really shifted. I went from like giving my life and my mission back. I worked in nonprofits. I was going into a bank. I was like, I needed to give less of my personal self to my work and create more of a boundary. And I sought out bigger companies so I could kind of, float a little bit. That did not happen. What happened was it basically showcased that a lot of the systems at City were not what may have been accessible, but did not enable someone who needed accessibility tools or workarounds like with Bluetooth. We'll talk more about that later, to connect effectively. And so basically, City had to customize my accommodations, and it took three months total. But in that 3 months, my boss created workarounds, brought awareness to the lack of like workarounds available, and that made sure that all of his seniors and their seniors knew that we needed to do better. And through that process, I was then asked to help City better its accommodations and make sure that we were better equipped for the next person after me. And it's been quite a different journey where if I can make City a better place, that is my responsibility as someone who's able to do that, to do so for the next person. And so I'm I guess a big fish in a big sea now. And so I'll end with, as someone who's a people manager, if there's something I can do to help my employee be more successful and bring their full self to work, and therefore do better work and have more results, it's my responsibility as a manager to ensure that environment exists. So you're working for a person, make sure when you're interviewing, you're working for someone with that mindset, because then you are always going to get the support you need, especially if it changes, as mine has over time, because the mindset isn't about that you have a shortcoming. It's about making sure you can excel to your potential.
Oh, brava. Beautifully, beautifully said. I think it's so fascinating what you have described as one of the opportunities, which of course is everyone's choice to make. For some, it's incredibly empowering to contribute to building greater accessibility within your particular workplace. For others, they feel that is not where they want to put their time and energy, or that is not their work, and I respect that. You know, the concept of emotional labor is real, and we all have to find where our own capacities are. But I too have found that participating and building a more accessible workplace has not only allowed me to develop a sense of agency and empowerment, but also to pay it forward or back, I guess, as you would think, to ensure that it's not just about me, that it's about others that may have a hearing loss, or even others that have other disabilities, to really hold the intersectionality of that. So we'll talk more about your advocacy efforts in a bit, but you've perfectly segued us to the next question, which is sharing what are some supportive behaviors that your colleagues and employers have offered you or demonstrated? Because it's really important that those that are participating and watching today can come away with some very specific options that they could explore in terms of supporting both themselves if they have a hearing loss or colleagues. And in that, what have been some of the helpful accommodations that you've used in addressing, you know, your needs at work or personally? So it's kind of a large question, but Christopher, let's start with you. So supportive behaviors of colleagues and accommodation.
Can I go second, actually?
Oh, absolutely. Nancy, lead us off.
Oh, well, fantastic. Thanks, Vanessa. So just to give you a little bit of history, when I started back at TD in 1998, from 1998 to 2006, I didn't have full access, let's say, because there was no interpreter on site for me. So there was a lot of depending on my colleagues to do, you know, or my managers to take notes, write back and forth. So can you imagine a training for 8 hours by writing back and forth? It was a challenge, right? It was definitely a challenge for me just to be caught up on all the information, and especially what they were talking about during meetings. But I sometimes felt like, you know, a loss. But it wasn't until 2006 when they actually brought in a full-time staff interpreter into the bank did I actually fully feel like I had access. I was able to not only, you know, get the information I needed, but also speak my voice and my needs out through the interpreter. So they were there through my huddles, they were there through my meetings with my managers. And then I have to do fast forward to 2020 during the pandemic. Thank goodness to technology, even though, you know, technology doesn't replace a live interpreter, but captioning in the captioning that's already embedded in the systems that we use are always helpful. I always want to say this though, for anybody out there, this is the thing, don't assume that captioning is going to work for all deaf people, because not all of us can use captioning in the same way. So never think that you can rely on captioning 100% to replace an interpreter. So
thank you, Nancy. And I love that you've highlighted that accessibility can be a dynamic, evolving process, and that it requires holding both, and that we hold when something is not full access, and that's not acceptable. The goal is full access, but also that at the same time, there may be real limitations that the employer or the organization is facing, or technological limitations that need time and space to evolve. And we hold both of those. But I love that it's been a progressive journey towards full accessibility and inclusion. That's phenomenal. Okay, Christopher, you requested to go second.
Yeah, thank you for the extension. So yeah, for me, I think it's a lot of what you know, was already mentioned by Nancy. You know, I use like live captions during meetings, which helps a lot in Teams meetings and Zoom meetings. But you know what's interesting? One of the other areas that I'll call out is sort of like around, like we were talking about disclosure, and one of the things that I've done is like kind of sharing my disability with my team members and sort of building like allies around me that are aware of my hearing loss, so that if something happens during a meeting where, for example, I miss something that's said, like maybe they ask me a question and I answer it just the completely wrong way because I thought I literally heard it completely differently, there will be somebody there that knows that kind of knows the context behind why I misanswered the question. They'll either interject and say, hey, uh, he actually said this, and they'll say it in like the perfect way where it's not too like, oh, you messed up, like you need to say it again. It's like very casual. So just having those allies, it's like really cool. And it's super important to me. So that's just one other thing I'll add, in addition to, the captions, the interpreter. Um, I think note taking is another one. I personally struggle to take notes. Because I'm trying to like listen and process the information at the same time and also trying to think about next steps and meetings. But what I've done is if I am having to take notes, what I do is I will either share my screen to show the notes, or when I'm typing, I will literally talk as I'm typing so they know that I'm taking notes so they can't talk over me. You know what I mean? So I'll be like, the next step is to send this document to Ryan. So they're not going to interrupt, right? So that's like sort of a way to let them know that I'm taking notes, and kind of being able to do things one at a time. So that's like one strategy that I use in addition to the allies around me.
Those are fantastic. And it is what you have shared is so important. I want to emphasize that while, of course, technology and other scheduling accommodations, things, where we hold our meetings, physical accommodations, those are all critical. But your naming community is an accommodation and a support that is integral to your success, but also in the workplace, but also just personally, so as to not feel isolated. And I love the idea of having what I call a hearing partner. If I know I'm going into a meeting that's going to be an environment that's challenging, I will make sure I've told someone I need to turn to you if I don't hear something or a question or whatever. And then that person is there. And the other thing that I love that you've named is the importance of being willing to change the cadence or the structure of a meeting so that you can hear, because that not only supports us, but it supports our colleagues who maybe have auditory processing issues. I have a dear friend who's a person who stutters, and the space that we all have, because they take a little bit longer to speak sometimes, rather than being self-conscious about that, that's an invitation and an opportunity for everyone to take a breath, to practice mindful listening, to be able to process what's being said for those of us that need space and time to do that. So always know that when you ask the ordinary quote, ordinary way that things are done to change so that you can have full access, you are likely supporting others as well. And that is such an important part of our own self-advocacy. So bravo, Christopher. So Laura, I would love to hear, because I know you've just been incredibly impactful inside of City, both for yourself as well as for others. What are some of the supportive behaviors that you've seen in your colleagues and accommodations that have been the most effective, formal or informal?
Yeah, so in terms of behaviors, I really look back. I joined right before COVID, and then we were asked to start returning to office. And during COVID, I had thought about buying a place, and I ended up not doing it, but I had to travel like an hour away from my parents' house to a city branch and have a conversation with a banker about opening up an account and mortgages. And we did all this with masks on. And I just so happened to be staying at my parents' house for a couple months. And so my mom and I went together as a little girls trip. And it was the first time in my life that I needed someone to interpret, really, truly interpret on my behalf. I could not understand the banker from across the room with a mask. You know, there was distance, there was no lip reading, everything felt muffled and like lost in translation. And the topic was very important because there's money involved. And I felt all my years of hard work to be fully mainstream just like utterly just get thrown out the window. And so when we were asked to, and I share that because when we were asked to return to office, I knew not only, you know, do we utilize, we have a global team, we utilize at the time Skype for business and now Zoom for business. For all of our calls, we used to convene if you were on site locally in conference room and then use like a conference speaker between our New York office, our London office, our India office, wherever they may be. And I mean, it was already hard for me to hear on those calls. But to think about everyone on those calls sitting in a conference room with a mask on, and then me having to listen without being able to lip read. Also, on top of that, I said to my boss, I don't know how I'm going to do this. It's already simply crazy that I'm functioning in these conference rooms, but the added layer of a mask, I'm not going to get anything. It never actually came to that. We now work almost exclusively on Zoom, even though some of us are in the office and some of us aren't. So the way we work has changed. But that fear of not being able to understand, I ended up presenting in his boss's town hall about my experience with mask and my need for lip reading and how that has really hindered my ability to understand conversation and that fear that I have. And then I also participated. I happen to have a friend who's a PR agent for Cricut, which is a product you can use to make your own arts and crafts type stuff. And they were designing, I guess, like a template for people to create masks that had a clear lip space. And so they asked me to try out some of the patterns, that's what the term is, and give my feedback. And so then I was on USA Today or one of those shows to talk about my experience. And so that got shared with my organization as well. So being invited, yes, the mental load that you mentioned, Vanessa, like being invited to talk about my experience, to educate those who actually want to be educated and who might not understand what I'm going through or how the way they work might negatively impact the way I work, has been really useful. The other thing that happens all the time, because as I mentioned, I work for a global company and I talk to people from around the world every day, I have noticed accents in certain part of the world, people, you know, that coupled with the speed of what they speak can be very limiting. And so I'll often ask colleagues from certain locations, I'm not going to name which, just like pause and be like, hi, you know, I understand there's a lot to get through. In order for us to get through it, I actually need you to talk a little bit slower. And I promise it will speed up the process, not slow us down. But I'm having a hard time following. And they already know they have quick speech, but for them to take that space to slow down their thoughts and like think about what they're saying and how they're articulating it helps us all. So it kind of, and then lastly, sorry, I know I've been talking a lot. My hearing aids have Bluetooth capabilities, but prior to getting the hearing aids that I have now, so my accessibility needs have shifted. I had a streamer, and so the IT department figured out a workaround so I can utilize my streamer to connect to the city cloud system when I'm in the office. I don't have this problem when I'm on my personal device at home. And that workaround shifted when I got Bluetooth in the hearing aids. They work better, but they're compatible with less systems. And so I need to bypass the Bluetooth on my city laptop at the office. And that often breaks. It actually broke last week. And that requires me to contact IT, and like the workaround is using my phone, but it's not as simple as like 1, 2, 3, it usually means I miss the first 5 to 7 minutes, whatever meeting I'm in, and I'm stressed and out of breath trying to make it all work at a moment's notice. And so I have a partner I work with at City who I constantly tell him that he needs to train someone else in case he's out. But it's been documented, and documenting issues are important. Making your boss aware of when those issues arise so they know they can't depend on you for phone calls that day. It's frustrating to say the least, but it's also, that's where disclosure comes into play. If you don't disclose and you don't update those who are supposed to support you, they don't know how to support you or when to support you. And so, again, picking managers wisely, and I know that's hard, but it really does make all the difference.
Absolutely. What a beautiful answer that one of the supportive behaviors your colleague can offer is empathy, and that you facilitate that by sharing your story. And that is what I mean by narrative advocacy. I think, of course, it's important to make requests and, particularly for technology, to be very forthright in disclosure if that's where you are in your journey. But if you're comfortable and able, the sharing of our stories, I have always found to be one of the most impactful things we can do to receive the support we need from our colleagues in our workplaces. Because there's something about the story becoming personal that not only allows people to step forward and care for you, but also it permissions others to be their authentic selves and bring their needs forward, which then just creates a much more dynamic and diverse team of people. And I think, elevates the workplace for all of us. So, and I also appreciate you naming the frustration that can happen when you're trying to use different technologies and the importance of being nimble, the way that you have been, but also really drawing on the importance of disclosure, because that allows you to be, judged fairly and appropriately. So I always tell the story when people are nervous about disclosing. If I don't disclose to my boss and I miss something in a meeting, they may say, she doesn't really pay attention in meetings. She's not good with details. Instead of, after I disclose, if I miss something in a meeting, they say, the meeting isn't accessible. That has to change so that Vanessa can hear. And so it shifts the responsibility when you're being evaluated into something negative to you to something positive towards change. So shifting a little bit as we're talking about various hearing disability experiences, what have been the strengths and benefits? It's so often, and I think, Laura, you named this, that, people can look at it as a deficiency, as a law, when that's not our lived experience at all. Or maybe our lived experience is a mixed one. I often, if I don't hear something, I'm rarely frustrated with my hearing loss. I'm more frustrated that it wasn't captioned or that the sound isn't clear, that I'm frustrated with the lack of accessibility, not with my hearing. So I love highlighting what various, what your experiences are in terms of what has been a strength or a benefit that has come out of your hearing, and how has your lived experience shaped who you are and how you see yourself. Nancy.
Oh, thanks, Vanessa. I appreciate that. So I've always identified as a deaf person. And when I say deaf, I mean capital D deaf, because I'm very proud of my deafness. It's who I am. It's my entire personality. Other people might identify as hard of hearing or deafened. But for me, identifying as a deaf person with a capital D, I'm actually just proud of that. I accepted myself for who I am from the beginning. my entire life. It was just, I've never thought I wasn't able to do things. I always thought I'm able to do anything anybody else does. I'm flexible, I'm patient. I'm a problem solver. Like, I love helping people solve problems. I find ways to communicate no matter what, if it's using pen and paper or even without it, sometimes just gesturing. There's always a way to communicate with people if you really want to find that way to do it. So if someone approaches me and starts talking to me, like I said earlier, letting them know I'm deaf, and let's figure out how we can understand each other without, without me having to feel bad for being deaf, because there's nothing wrong with that, right? So I think that's what's really important, just accepting ourselves for who we are. And I'm so proud of myself for being able to do that, right? There's nothing wrong with being deaf. I hate using the word normal, because what is normal nowadays, right? I've met so many diverse people because of my deafness, and I've been enriched through, either Zoom meetings or webinars or disability events that I've been able to participate. And I want to inspire that in others on a daily basis.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey!
I'm curious, Christopher, if you have any thoughts on this, on the strength of, and I think you're on mute. There you
Plus one, yeah, plus one to everything that Nancy said about being, capital D deaf. Yeah.
Go, Christopher, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of additional things that, I've found as values is, I feel like, sure, I don't hear as well, but, I'm a great listener, because I'm able to have such a good conversation with somebody, and, you know, we're both on the same page about, my hearing loss or whatever, right? My disability, whatever. Like, I just really value that opportunity to connect, and I'll remember everything that that you shared with me. I always get that compliment whenever I'm with people. They always say, "Wow, good memory. How do you remember about my family from 2 years ago? The last time we talked." I'll be like, "I don't know. I just remember it." So I think that's something that I really appreciate. I've been able to use it in a lot of situations. The second one is patience. So we've all faced sort of barriers or challenges with our disability, and so we built a lot of skills and ways to navigate it, so that we can continue to thrive with it together. And so that's another big area for me, is patience. So I would say those are the two gains that I get out of it.
The wonderful themes of pride and listening and patience. I think it's so important to be able to reframe. I do a lot of mentoring, and often people will come and they do see their disability, particularly in the context of an employment situation, as a less than or a deficiency that they need to somehow make up. And I always encourage people to, it is not about erasing the lived reality, but often the aperture is too narrow. We need to widen it out a little and say, for years I didn't disclose my deafness in the workplace because I did see it as, well, this makes me less of an employee. But it never occurred to me to say, I'm deaf and hard of hearing, and I am a nonverbal communication expert. I will be able to tell you, I may not be able to tell you everything that was said in a meeting verbatim, but I will tell you everything that wasn't said. Who wasn't paying attention, who didn't understand, who's frustrated. And Christopher, you raised this, that actually it gives you a lot of really wonderful interpersonal skills, because when you are reading lips, you have to look at someone. And so people will say, wow, when you talk to Vanessa, she really is paying attention to you. I'm like, yes, I am, because I have to hear you. And so there can be these really wonderful skills that come out of our physical realities. And I encourage people to think of them as variances. I hear I just use my eyes mostly to hear. But it's still hearing, it's just different. And so I think that that is something that can be very important about your own resilience and your own self-empowerment and confidence, is that reframing of how can my disability also be a strength in addition to at times a challenge. So as we're coming towards a close, and we want to leave a little bit of time for questions if we can, but
Vanessa, can I just add in one more thing? I think
absolutely,
one more
please
superpower
do.
I think we have.
Absolutely. Please.
At least I can speak for myself. I feel like I'm more creative about my approaches and more perceptive, not just of body language, because I would agree with you 100,000% on that, but more perceptive of all the different vantage points in which might affect something. So maybe that's why I do communication for a living, because I see the consequences and the benefits of everything around me, but how kind of putting the Lego blocks together of all the different implications of what might happen, and then coming up with creative approaches. Because of my hearing loss, and I've constantly had to come up with creative approaches to hearing and using my eyes to hear. It's kind of ironic, right? You know, my whole way of being has been a creative mishmash of figuring it out. So I'm resilient. I don't stop until I have an answer, and I'm creative about how I go about it and bring different perspective to the table. So I think that those are major superpowers we bring to corporate America.
Oh, love the creativity. I had a colleague who said, by the time I have gotten to work, and this was a person who utilized a wheelchair, he said, I have solved probably 20 hard problems before I've even gotten to the office, before you've even started working. And there is no creativity greater than trying to survive in a largely inaccessible world. So here, absolutely, absolutely. So coming to the last question, and I'm going to kind of combine them a little bit, is what advice, if any, would you give your younger self? Because we've all kind of talked about how we've gone on a journey of understanding and evolution. As your younger self starting out as a young professional, what advice would you give them around self-advocacy and personal empowerment? And I think that will also serve as advice to maybe those in the webinar watching it now or later, as they think about how they talk about their hearing loss and their disability and asking for what they need. So, Christopher, what would your advice be for your younger self?
That's a good question. I think there's been some moments where I've had sort of frustration build up in my head around just the continuous self-advocacy, and just maybe exhaustion is the right word. And I started to realize that, it's all about sort of framing and realization that if I can assume best intentions of the other person and why they want to learn about my disability or why they're asking. Some people ask really good questions. Some people ask a question that's sort of kind of just feels like a stigma, And so being able to build those skills around just digesting that information and just assume best intentions is really important. And being able to just consume any sort of question and be able to give the right, or give your own thoughts or recommendation or advice about how to best work with somebody with hearing loss, deaf or hard of hearing. So yeah, I think that's the big thing that I really try to think about. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, it's just assuming best intentions and all that. Oh, I remember the last piece. I brain farted there a little bit, but one of the other aspects is sort of around these relationships, the people that you're working with. you're going to be working with them over the course of a 5-year career. Maybe you'll run into them, 10 years down the line. So if you can build that like really good relationship at the start, like they're going to like become an advocate. They're going to become an ally. That's pretty cool. So just being invested in them from the beginning is really important. So I'll officially leave it at that.
Such wise, sage advice of assuming best intentions. I like to think of that as compassion and equanimity, but also really investing in interpersonal relationships, both for our own community, but also our own advocacy. Beautiful, beautiful. And Laura, what advice would you have for wee Laura starting out in her professional career
Oh,
around self-advocacy and empowerment?
it's hard because, as I said before, I feel like the environment was like against me. And so it's hard to like to navigate, like to remind myself in those like it's easier said than done to remind yourself in those moments that it's not personal. It felt so personal, and I know I'm not alone in having it a little bit harder breaking in. So my advice would be, if I could do life over, is to maybe even more diversify my skill set. Like I kind of went, I get very narrow focus or laser focus on a topic or an area, and that's great. But if I could do my career over, I would have taken more coding classes or even tried coding. I would have tried to learn as much as possible and diversify my skill set as much as possible. I don't know if that's necessarily the right answer to the question, but really, managers want to see that you're learning and you're versatile and you bring as much to the table as possible. And being an expert in one thing or two things isn't quite enough anymore. It can be enough later, I think, later on in your career as you develop a track record. But starting out, it's, be willing and be eager to learn as much as possible, especially when you're interviewing, and definitely take time to not just job hunt. But remembering that even if this might not have been the case when I was younger, that going forward, I am in an empathetic workplace that values empathetic and being empathetic leadership and being compassionate and thoughtful, that those around me who don't know who I am and not learn about my hearing loss and who ask questions that might not come across in the most sensitive way are truly just trying to learn. And they don't have the right words, and they don't always say things in the way that you would like them to, but trying and see where they're coming from and appreciate that they're trying to learn and not get caught up in the details of what they're saying. And use it as a tool to educate them that, hey, I know you're probably trying to ask me this. The way in which you ask your question might not be interpreted as well in the future. You might want to think about using this language. Use everything as a teaching tool. And try not to get too frustrated that unfortunately we have to teach the world around us about ourselves and about how to accommodate us and how to talk about hearing loss and deafness and the difference between the two and the difference between capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf. Fortunately, that is on us as much as to teach as it is on everyone else to learn. Hopefully, all we do is normalize the conversation so that having someone disclose their hearing loss in the workplace, just like someone might wear glasses on their eyes or walk in with, wheel in with a wheelchair, it's normalized. And
Right.
so like eventually we get to a place in 20, 30 years, maybe sooner, where people don't have to ask questions anymore. That they're like, oh yeah, my cousin has a cochlear implant, or my kid's sister wears a hearing aid, and like it's just normalized by by society, the dream, right? So we have a little bit more work to do until we get there. But I know I kind of went off the beaten path on that question, but it's easier said than done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wise advice. And Nancy, as you look back on your younger self, what advice would you give her just starting out in her career?
That's a great question, actually. I think the best advice that I would give myself is, or for any other deaf or hard of hearing person who's looking to be, be successful. I mean, I think it's step out of your comfort zone. Don't live in that same box. Get to meet people, like interact, socialize, network. I think it's so important to learn from other people, because not only are we educating others on ourselves, but we need to educate ourselves about other people as well. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask the questions you want to ask, with or without an interpreter, even if you're with on a one-on-one with your manager. So I think those are some of the things that are really important. You need to develop yourself. And if you don't ask those questions in order to develop yourself, it's really hard to find that success, because you're not open to developing, right? So making sure you're communicating through interpreters or without, as I mentioned, I would tell myself to network even more than I already have. Be an advocate for others. Make sure people are understanding, as Laura said, what deaf culture is, what, understanding the difference between capital D deaf and small d deaf, have those coffee chats. And then just be encouraged by sharing your own success story. Don't be ashamed of what you've accomplished. Actually share it with others. And the best, I guess, the last thing I'd like to share for everybody is, like myself, I am differently abled. I don't find myself disabled. I'm able in so many other ways. I went to a persons with disabilities event, and someone used that term with me, and it really impacted me, that there is no difference from me than another hearing person. The only difference is we hear differently. I hear through my eyes, as was mentioned earlier, and it's a capability, not a disability. So that really impacted me quite a bit. And I can do anything anybody else can, just as well.
What a wonderful note to close on. Thank you so much. We've heard so much wise wisdom, and I want to thank all of the panelists for their candor and their thoughtfulness, and their wisdom, as I said. And may it have been of use and service to all of you who have attended. I know we had some questions. Unfortunately, we did not have the time to answer them. However, I encourage you to work with your medical care team. I encourage you to work within your hearing loss advocacy communities or organizations, especially like Lyme, but bring yourself into a community that can give you both the resources, the information, and the emotional, physical well-being and support that you need to thrive, to be the best version of yourself personally and professionally. Thank you for your time and your attendance, and I will hand it back to Renee.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you to our panelists. I have been wanting to focus on deaf and hard of hearing for some time, and I think I was just waiting for this panel to come together. So you were all amazing. You answered a lot of the questions, I think, through your insights. So that's the good news. We will share this recording out with everyone. We encourage you to join our community, either as a Lyme Network member or a corporate partner, or one of the other ways that you can join. So thank you, Vanessa, Laura, Nancy, and Christopher, and to our ASL interpreters as well. We so appreciate your time and look forward to having you join us for more sessions. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.